morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name's Brian Burrs, and welcome to Journey into the Present, my first official episode that I'm going to call Origins. Over the last 2 years, I've done a complete reset in my life. Doesn't mean I've changed every aspect of my life, but I've certainly changed the way I view things, and certainly the way I view life and my day-to-day interactions. And so for context, I think I shared with you all that I've suffered from anxiety for over the last 20 plus years, and to some degree, pretty much my whole life. The context of that is I was taking somewhere between 150 to 250 Xanax pills every year just to make it through. And almost no one knew that other than myself and my doctor. I'm sharing that information so you understand most people never would suspect that I had any level of anxiety because I learned to hide it really, really, really well. And a lot of other people learn that trick too. And it's a very heavy burden to bear, especially if you have to do it on your own, which I did for the majority of the last 20 years. It's very challenging, but I'm hoping that as you hear my journey into living more into the present, that you will have similar results. And those similar results are, in the year of 2023, I took 2 pills. 2 pills, and they were both taken in the first month of the year. And so after that, I essentially finished the year without the assistance of any anxiety medications because, well, I started living more presently. And what I realized was, through my reading, through therapy, through the groups that I joined, that almost every bit of anxiety that I felt in my life was internal. Doesn't mean that I was creating problems for myself, but my inability to stay in the present moment was creating significant anxiety and stress for me. And it was me all along. So one of the people that I started reading was this gentleman by the name of Eckhart Tolle. And Eckhart talks about how most people live unconsciously. And he talks about what is non-present living. And he says, the present is all we have. And the past, which gives us our identity, and the future, which holds the promise of fulfillment, are mere illusions that we create by imagining them in the present. He says we all do this. But I wanted to see, I wonder when I stopped living in the present and started living in the past, or in many cases, living in the future. And boy, did I really uncover some things that I had talked about in therapy, sometimes many cases that I thought were resolved, and maybe they were, but they were certainly still having an impact on my life. And so I'll give you a couple of very brief stories. Back in '86, my mom was and still is the greatest inspiration of my life. I love you, Mom. And she's a woman of tremendous courage. And I've always looked up to my bigger brother. Back in '86, he was a bigger, stronger, faster, better looking version of me. Not anymore, of course. But back then he was. And there was a day in 1986 where Mom was getting hurt. And my big brother wasn't powerless to stop it. But it wasn't just him. At least he tried. I just froze. And I thought, through years of therapy, well, that was just a terrible thing that I had to see. I was a kid and there was nothing I can do about it. But somewhere in my subconscious, I was constantly reliving and not living in the present and wishing that I had done more. And so the way that came out was I started looking for people to rescue. You can imagine where that led me. Not necessarily the most healthy relationships, at least not for me. Professionally, I'd say I always had, a chip on my shoulder when I was much younger. Probably because I struggled in school. And people always told me, hey man, it's okay, you're just an average guy. And there's nothing wrong with being an average guy. Most people are average. But I also remember what my mom used to tell me, and that is, doesn't matter what you do, son, just be the best at it. In my head, well, how are you going to be the best at anything if you're just an average guy? So as I entered my professional life, I wanted to prove everybody wrong. And the way that came across was quick to anger, perhaps arrogance, bad decisions in some regards. And a great example of that were the ratings. I've worked in several Fortune 50 organizations, and I would strive and do everything I could to get those top ratings. When I didn't get them, I'd darn near fall apart. The best part about that story is, and by best I mean worst, is when I did get them, and I got several, they were empty. Achieved the rating, got the top rating, brought home the bag. Didn't solve the problem. Anxiety persisted. I felt even more pressure to perform because now I'm at the top, now I got to stay there. Again, there's nothing wrong with not being complacent. There is something wrong with constantly beating yourself down to the point where you make yourself sick, which is what I was doing. So there's just a couple of examples of when I looked back and realized I'm always looking forward and I'm never really thinking about what I'm doing in the moment. What comes next? What do I got to do next? That's where I was spending all of my time. And so I had unintentionally set up an environment where true joy could only be experienced somewhere else. True joy can only be experienced somewhere else because the future never comes. What I mean by that is, if I'm thinking about if I do this, I'm going to be happy, everything's going to be good in the future. Well, by the time that I'm thinking about arrives, what is that? Now it's the present. And so I'm already thinking, when this happens, I'm going to be good. And every time something would happen, I didn't savor it. I just thought more about the future. And I never got that sense of satisfaction or fulfillment. And that created tremendous anxiety for me. And happiness, I'm a pretty happy guy, but I think happiness and joy are two different things. And I would say up until recently, last 2 years, I don't know that I had experienced true joy other than maybe the birth of my kids. And even that was short-lived because it immediately went to, I've got to make more money. I've got to be able to provide them with the opportunities I didn't have. Pop a pill. Can't take the pressure. Sometimes there was no pressure. It was all what I was putting on myself. But that's how I coped. And so my origin story started to figure out where I was living, and it wasn't in the present moment. And so I would ask a question of all of you that I hope you'll ask yourselves between now and our next episode, and that is, do you really want to go through life without being present? Do you really want to go through life without being present, without experiencing true joy? Always thinking about what comes next or thinking about all the bad mistakes that you've made and never truly living in the moment. It's a very, very difficult place to be. I should know. Spent almost 45 years there. But getting free from that, you can experience true joy. But the first step was realizing that you weren't even present to begin with. How are you going to enjoy what you're doing when you're not even there? I hope you'll join me on the next one in our journey into the present. Till then, have a good night.